Hello, and welcome to the Culture Beats podcast, featuring conversations about pop culture and many other aspects of life. I'm your host, Chris Bournet. In this very special episode, I speak with Kim Goodwin Martin, daughter of wrestling legend Marva Scott. Marva, along with her older sisters Babs Wingo and Ethel Johnson, were the first women to integrate professional wrestling back in the 1950s. They were the Jackie Robinson of wrestling. Kim and I have known each other for years, and she and her family were nice enough to sit down and talk about their family's legacy for Lady Wrestler, a documentary that I produced and directed. So if you want to know more about the trailblazing black lady wrestlers, check out the Lady Wrestler documentary on Prime Video. In this new interview for the podcast, Kim and I talk about her family's enduring legacy and the work that Kim and her family are doing to bring more awareness to the amazing accomplishments of her mom and aunts. Without further ado, here's our conversation. Well, Kim, thank you so much for making time to speak with me. I mean, we go back, way back. Well, we've known each other 20-some years now.
Can you believe it?
I know. Time just flies by. And I'm just so proud of you for just fighting for your mom and your aunt's legacy and all you're doing to, put respect on their names. So, first of all, how would you like people, what would you like people to know about you and your mom and your aunts and their legacy?
Well, first, Chris, thank you for taking the time to interview me. I think when I think about what I want people to know is I want people to actually know the history. I want them to know that they were the first black female lady wrestlers, okay? I need everyone to know that they were the first colored lady wrestlers. And so they began wrestling in 1950, and so it's very important to me for people to know their legacy because they were the foundation to wrestling today. So it's like one of those hidden treasures, and I don't want it to be hidden anymore.
Yeah.
I really want people to know about them and to understand what they did and the role that they played in black athletics and just being role models and history makers. Their legacy is really rich, and it's really important to me before I leave this earth for everyone to know about them and the things that they accomplished.
Absolutely. So I think a lot of people don't even know that this is like your family's history is a I hate to say forgotten part of black history, but even those of us who grew up here in Columbus, Ohio, where all this history started, didn't know it. I wasn't taught this history growing up in school. And so can you talk about how Billy Wolf, the promoter that basically recruited your mom and your aunts into wrestling, how he got his start? And this has all been chronicled not only in the documentary, Lady Wrestler that we made, but also the new movie Queen of the Ring, which is on Apple. And you can also watch Lady Wrestler on Prime Video. But people didn't even know that Billy Wolf basically started his wrestling enterprise right here in Columbus, Ohio.
Exactly. Well, first of all, Chris, it was very interesting, and I was very happy that my Aunt Ethel Johnson, who was the first two-time Negro champion, decided to do an interview because she had never done an interview. She just did not feel comfortable talking about it, and you made her feel comfortable.
Oh, thank you. That was such an honor.
And and you literally, figuratively, I don't care how you put it, you are the only one with the last and actually the first interview of her. No one else has an interview with her, and no one ever made her feel that comfortable. And after she lost her sisters and then her husband, and then, Shelly reached out with her friend, and then you came on the scene, it made her feel so comfortable. And we cannot thank you enough for that. Because you did that, then that made her document her legacy, in history. Before that, like you said, no one knew. Because there was a lot of things. I mean, you got to think about it. They started right after Jackie Robinson was put into the Major League Baseball.
Yeah.
And so Billy Wolf, who was a wrestling promoter at the time, and he was married to Mildred Burke, wanted to integrate wrestling.
And Mildred Burke was the first women's world wrestling champion. And we should say Billy Wolf and Mildred Burke were white, so they were really ahead of their time in not just allowing, but recruiting black women into.
They were ahead of their time in a lot of things when you think about it. First of all, you think about that time period. Even Mildred Burke, right? she wasn't allowed to have a bank account. She wasn't allowed to, you had to be married, but she was a smart young lady, and she ended up marrying Billy Wolf. And during the process of marrying him, she realized, and they both realized, how important women in lady wrestling was, right? But at that time, there were no colored, African American, black, we got all these different Negro, but at the time they were called colored. There were no colored wrestlers, female. So what ended up happening is Billy Wolf actually had a place here in Columbus. There was a hotel that he actually worked out of.
The Park Hotel.
The Park Hotel that he worked out of.
Downtown Columbus.
Yes, and so he would recruit, ladies and young girls to wrestle. This particular time, my Aunt Babs happened to be at a club on Long Street, and during those times, Long Street was the heyday, right?
On and popping.
Yes, it was. Everybody was on Long Street. It's like the Renaissance when you go on Long Street, and so
it was basically like Columbus's version of Harlem.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. And so Billy Wolf would go there and hang out because they had good music, all of that. So my aunt was actually working as a co-check girl. Now, she was in high school and she went to South High School. So she was at South High School, and my Aunt Babs was 17 years old, and she was in school at the time, and she was working as a co-check girl. And he walked over to her and he said, "Hey, would you like to be a wrestler? You can make lots of money." And she said, "What? Sign me up." And so she was actually the first colored lady wrestler in the process. And so that's how he met her. Once he met her, my Aunt Babs was the oldest of the sisters. So my Aunt Ethel went right behind my Aunt Babs. She even said that in your documentary, how she followed behind her sister. And so at that time, she was 15 years old, my Aunt Ethel was, and my Aunt Babs was 17. And so my Aunt Ethel was not allowed to wrestle, but she would follow my Aunt Babs and watch my Aunt Babs do everything. And then they realized that my Aunt Ethel was a little firecracker, right? And so when they realized that, she was very athletic and she could do all these things, then she followed in the footsteps of her sister and she began to wrestle.
Right.
Following that, now my mother at the time, my Uncle Charles tells the story how my mother was like in high school and she went to Central, and so she was in high school and she was just she wasn't thinking about wrestling, she was just having her a good old high school time. But then my Aunt Ethel would come back home and she would have fur coats, money, cars, fancy little dogs, and she was just living the life, or so it appeared. So my mother was like, okay, sign me up. And so she was the youngest, and she went in at the age of 16.
Wow.
So at that time, it was all three of them, and they were called the Wingo sisters. Now, if you lived in Columbus and you knew them, then you knew them as the Wingo sisters. But as they wrestled, they were so athletic. For example, my Aunt Ethel created the standing drop kick. So if you look at wrestling before they entered wrestling, all you see is grappling, where they grab each other, throw each other down, smack each other, punch each other. There was no flying off the ropes. There was no drop kicking, but my Aunt Ethel created the standing drop kick. And my Aunt Babs and my Aunt Ethel began to create moves. So she created the standing drop kick and the flying scissor, right? So they were then known as the Flying Wingo sisters to the people who knew them.
Wow.
Everyone else in the industry had no idea that they were sisters. As a matter of fact, that was one of the biggest things that they kept secret.
Because eventually your Aunt Ethel and your mom used ring names like Ethel Johnson and Marva Scott, right?
Yes. Only one who used their maiden name was my Aunt Babs, and she was called Babs Wingo, and my Aunt Ethel was Ethel Johnson, and my mother was Marva Scott.
Right.
So and then when you add the little adjective on, battling Babs Wingo, marvelous Marva Scott, that made it even more exciting,
right?
And they also wrestled under different names, right? So, for example, my mother was Marva Scott, but she was also known as the African Princess Lioness.
Wow. Okay.
So she would put a mask on, and then she would become the African Princess Lioness. You know, and my Aunt Ethel also wrestled under Rita Valdez.
When they would go to Latin America.
When they would go to Latin America. Yeah. So, you know, so they had different names, but the key was no one ever was supposed to know that they were sisters.
I mean, and we just mentioned Latin America. We should point out this was not just like a regional thing or something that was local to Columbus where they were just wrestling in local high school gyms. These your mom and your aunts, they were going all over the world at a time when it was unprecedented. Unless you were in the service as a African American, I mean, very few people left their community unless they were going to like a family reunion or something. So I mean, they were going Latin America, Asia, all over the world. This wasn't a local, regional, little rinky-dink operation.
It wasn't. And think about that. Okay, so we're talking about the 1950s. Like, planes was like tin cans, right? You know, so they would get on planes and they would fly, you know. And I mean, when you think about some of the places they went, Australia, Cuba, Mexico, Canada, you know, I mean, like they were international stars and they traveled throughout the United States. But when they would go overseas, they would have a totally different experience than they would have here. But to think about their ages, now you put their ages in the play too, and all the things, they were so young. All I can think of is like they just had to be fearless. But part of it was probably just the youth and not realizing the danger that they were in. But the whole time they were breaking records, they were headlining, you know, and when they first started, you know, they could only wrestle each other, you know, because it was, you know, Jim Crow laws. So you weren't allowed to wrestle white women, you know, and so because they were the first three, they had to wrestle each other. I mean, who else are you going to wrestle? And then they recruited other ladies, you know, and so the roster began to grow. But out of that roster, my Aunt Babs became the first interracial champion, which is a little known fact.
Yes.
Very little known fact.
Yeah. And also, so we'll go into, in Queen of the Ring, they showed the first interracial championship. Queen of the Ring, the new movie. They showed the interracial championship between your Aunt Babs and Mildred Burke, who was by that time the first women's world wrestling. I always have trouble saying that, women's world wrestling champion.
Yes.
Yeah.
She was the first woman world wrestler champion that was a millionaire. Can you believe? Like,
right.
In those times, it was totally unheard of.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about Queen of the Ring. That's the biopic of Mildred Burke that came out earlier this year, and it was in a whole bunch of festivals. You got to see it at many of the places that it played, walk the red carpet. And so, of course, you can't have a biopic about the first women's world wrestling champion without the black women who were the trailblazers. So your mom and your aunts were characters in the movie. How was that, seeing them on the screen?
Oh my God, listen. They were featured in this movie. And if I want to tell you how it felt, I have to tell you the backstory. So the backstory was, someone called me by the name of Brian, and he's like, you know what, there's a movie that they're making in Kentucky. It's about Mildred Burke, but we just watched your Aunt Babs and Mildred Burke's match, and everybody walked away going, who is Babs? Wingo.
Wow.
And I was like, excuse me? Say what now? So where are you doing this at? And he said, Kentucky. I said, Kentucky? He said, Lexington. So I immediately thought, I'm going to have to sweep my way up on that set. Because no one called us. No one told me, hey, we get ready to talk about your family. And in our previous experiences, when they talk about my family, because it's unknown facts, the facts are sometimes distorted. And so I wanted to be a part of that. Okay, so I had this whole plan. Like, I'm going to go down on Saturday, and I'm going to just sweep my way on the set. I'm going to walk up to the producer like, how you doing? Yeah, my name's Kim. You talking about my family? You know, the Wingo sisters?
Yeah.
That's my family.
Yeah.
But before I could get in my car, the movie had wrapped up.
Wow.
You know, and so the thing was, I just kept getting things like on Facebook. I really believe nobody can tell me it wasn't God, because he would like send me messages, right? I don't look at Facebook and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But whenever something would go down about the Queen of the Ring or my family, it would pop up. I did research. I found out who the actresses were, right? Okay, so now we get into it. We're like a year and a half in. Then all of a sudden, I see on Facebook that they're getting ready to start showing it at film festivals. Still, I ain't got no phone call from nobody. So I'm like, it's all right. I got on a plane and flew right out to Fort Lauderdale, Florida to see the film. And at that point, I had not met the producer. I had only talked to this guy, Brian, who at this point was a figment of my imagination. Because when I walked up to get our tickets, we had regular tickets. Like, what? I don't get to go to the after party.
Yeah.
I ain't VIP. We just had regular tickets. Yeah. So I should have brought my jacket today, because my jacket is a famous jacket. Because that jacket has walked the red carpets, and that jacket, one of my friends designed a jacket for me, and on the back of the jacket it says the Wingo sisters, and it has their 3 pictures on the back of the jacket. The reason for that is I don't want to have to tell you who I am. I want you to know who I am. So I walked in with some authority, right? So I'm sitting there and I got my phone in my hand and I'm waiting for their part. And all of a sudden they pop up on the screen and they're walking with like a force. And for that moment, I lost it. I was like, and screamed in the movie. I was like, hold up, get your composure, bring it down. This is a movie. This is not a concert. But when he said the marvelous Marva Scott, Evelyn instead of Ethel, Dynamo Johnson, and battling Babs Wingo, my whole heart just popped out my chest. Like I felt it was so electric. For a moment, everything that we have been trying to tell people about their history, he put it on the big screen and solidified the story that I've been trying to tell. So I was so excited. I didn't hear a word they said. All I saw was them. And later on in the movie, I got to see my Aunt Babs. And quite frankly, we never knew that my Aunt Babs was the first to wrestle in an interracial championship until we saw it on this movie, right? And for years, we were trying to figure out, why did Aunt Babs just stop wrestling? Okay, so the story was she wanted to get married, she wanted to have kids, and that was the story. But when I saw that movie and I saw her wrestling, and then they had her have this speech at the end of the movie, at the end of the match, I should say, it just radiated. And I was like, I think this is why she was so upset. Now, Ash said that he made the speech up, for dramatic purposes. And I totally get it. But I will honestly say, if what happened really happened, which what really happened is she won, but she never got credit for it,
right,
then I could actually see her standing up saying some things. But I don't think it was this little light of mine, Right. But I could actually see her speaking her piece and speaking her truth.
Yeah, because your Aunt Babs was no shrinking violet.
Absolutely
you couldn't
not.
Be in that business.
No, you couldn't. And she was the matriarch, like the matriarch of the family. So she couldn't afford to play those games. Right. So she was strictly about business, and she was so smart because not only did she learn how to wrestle, she learned the business of wrestling. Her, my aunt, and my mom. But my Aunt Babs was the first, and she took it serious. Like, she learned how to train the wrestlers. She trained them. So when she came out of the ring, she still had income because she was training the up-and-coming wrestlers along with Mildred Burke.
Right.
But when she learned the business, that changed the whole game. Like, knowing how to book and what to do and where to go and all of that stuff. So she made sure that she hung under Billy Wolf and Mildred Burke to learn the business part. So she was more than just a wrestler. They were more than just wrestlers. They were actually business women operating their own company within themselves as wrestlers.
Right. And we should say, I'm sure people are wondering how filmmakers can just take your family history and portray them in a movie without getting permission. And, not being an entertainment attorney, but from what I understand is that if someone is a public figure and they've done anything noteworthy and they've been written up in the press, anybody can take their history and put their own spin on it. Like, for example, there was a movie called Marilyn that came out a few years ago. I think the actress who was in it got nominated for an Oscar, and the filmmakers didn't have to go get the permission of Marilyn Monroe's estate, because Marilyn Monroe is one of the most famous women in the world. So I say all that to say that just goes to show how accomplished your mom and aunts were, that they were so accomplished that their history was in public domain. Unfortunately, that means people don't have to get their permission your permission, I should say,
to do anything.
Yeah.
And it's so, you know what?
Yeah.
It was such an education for me, right? Because I did talk to, and I do have an attorney.
Yeah.
And part of the thing is, like you said, it's called public domain. So anytime you put anything on social media, in the newspapers, or in a public platform,
right,
then they can take it and they can do whatever they want with it. Except because they're deceased, they can't, be disparaging. Right? So when people go, "Oh, are you in the movie? Your family's in the movie," and they think you got a royalty check, that's not how it happens. That's not how it goes. Basically, they can do whatever they want, which is why when I tell my story, I continue to tell the same story, because maybe one day somebody might want to do a movie and find out the backstory. And so when they find out the backstory, then they can come to me and my family and find out those stories, and then those stories will be released. That is very interesting, because think about Mike Tyson, right? Mike Tyson did his movie when he stood up and he just talked through the whole movie, and then Netflix or somebody did a whole nother movie, and basically took him out of the movie. He got $0. I mean, he hollered like, the screaming murder. But once you put it on a public platform, then it becomes public domain. And they can do it. So I was not upset, about the movie and how some of the things were changed, because I have a clear understanding of that. What I did appreciate is that he put them in the movie. But when I think about it, man, that was one of the major parts of the movie. Because basically, Billy Wolf integrated wrestling with my family. And at that point, that let everybody know who the first lady wrestlers were. Because it's always been, who's first, who's this, who's that, and quite frankly, I feel that way. My family was the first, and they need their dues. They've never gotten their dues. A lot of the ladies haven't gotten their dues, but I just feel in my heart that once people learn about my family, then it'll open the interest to learn about the rest of the ladies. And so hopefully someday, this will be a great miniseries.
Absolutely.
Because there are a lot of ladies to talk to, but talking to the first three, or talking to them and putting them in their appropriate place, means the world to me.
And the director of Queen of the Ring, before your mom and your aunts make their entrance, they show Billy Wolf and Mildred at an event at the White House, and they show Jackie Robinson playing on a TV set. So they show that's where Billy Wolf got the inspiration. So your mom and your aunts were literally the Jackie Robinson of
wrestling,
professional wrestling.
The lady Jackie Robinson.
So they deserve their place. They deserve to be known for their place in history.
Absolutely. And I can't, it took, 50 years? Okay. Before my Aunt Babs finally got some roses and got some credit. Because up until this point, it was more about my mom, my Aunt Ethel, and my mom, right? And knowing that my Aunt Babs was the matriarch, it makes me happy to see that she is finally getting her credit, even though in the movie it was portrayed a little different. Right.
But with any biopic, they like we were saying, for dramatic purposes, they'll rewrite things, or they'll compress storylines, or they'll make up an extra character just so they can keep the story moving. So that's why when the movie that centers your mom and your aunts is made, it needs to be, as you said, told with the real authentic history. In part two of my conversation with Kim, we'll delve further into her family's enduring legacy and the work that she and her family are doing to bring more attention to the amazing accomplishments of her mom and aunts. That's next time on Culture Beats. If you like this video, please leave a comment, share it, and subscribe to my channel.